An elderly widow is brutally murdered in her home.
This was an absolute senseless crime.
Police have little evidence and no one's talking.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community.
But a psychic has disturbing visions of the crime.
She had been stabbed so many times.
Can a psychic's insights solve the mystery of who killed Rose Swartwood? Elmyra, New York, an historic town of clapboard houses and white picket fences. A town Huckleberry Finn author Mark Twain once called home. A town unaccustomed to crime. But not on August 25th, 1988. On that day, 74-year-old Rose Swartwood, widowed and living alone, is found dead in her apartment. She'd been the victim of a shocking attack. Beaten, bitten, and stabbed to death.
I think the nature of the crime, being an elderly woman that lived alone, was very upsetting.
It caught a lot of the media attention and upset a lot of the people in the community.
I mean, it was a terrible, heinous crime.
Mike Moosey from the local sheriff's office and Corky Patterson from the Elmyra Police Department are assigned to investigate this gruesome case.
Yeah, there hadn't been a murder in Elmyra in several years.
Jim Pfeiffer is a journalist who covered the story.
What bothered people the most, I thought, was this is a woman who's innocent, who has no enemies. It could happen to me. You know, it isn't supposed to happen to anyone, but especially to people like this.
It was believed from the very beginning of this investigation that it was possibly a burglary gone to a homicide rather than a planned homicide. I think we felt quite strongly that this was not anticipated to be a homicide from the beginning, but more a burglary gone bad.
Moosey and Patterson face major problems. Despite the apparent frenzy of the murder, little forensic evidence was left behind by Rose's killers.
The crime scene was very cleaned up. There were some things disturbed still when the police arrived there, but it appeared they had scrubbed down the walls and the floors with some type of cleaning agent.
Not only this, but locals are reluctant to talk.
A lot of times people just would clam up and they'd give them false information. So it'd make it more difficult for the police, who in this community were used to quickly solving a crime.
Rose lived in one of Elmyra's tougher neighborhoods, the Hawthorne Court housing project.
Well, I believe there were people that felt they would be threatened if they cooperated with the police.
Scores of potential suspects are interviewed and eliminated. Only 2 rise to the top of the list. William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore, both local, both well known to police.
We were relatively certain who these suspects were and what their involvement in the crime was.
With little evidence to tie Cuddy and Moore to the crime scene and no witnesses prepared to come forward, the investigation gradually stalls.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community. Police being blamed for not doing a good job, when that wasn't the case. They were doing a good job. They just couldn't get a lot of cooperation, a lot of information.
Months pass with no new leads. The case grows cold. But detectives Moosey and Patterson don't give up. They're not about to let Rose Swartwood's killers away with murder. 2 years after her homicide, with nothing to lose, Detective Moosey decides to try something very different. He decides to enlist a psychic.
I had heard about Phil Jordan from other law enforcement agencies. I had never been to him before.
Phil Jordan is one of America's best-known psychics, with a strong track record of helping cops solve difficult crimes.
I have been working with the police for the past 35 years.
Jordan uses photographs to make a psychic connection to crime scenes.
When I work on a case, I will take a picture of the victim. And as I look at that picture, I start seeing things about that person.
Detectives decide to tell Jordan nothing about Rose Swartwood or her murder.
When Corky and Mike came to the first meeting, they brought a picture of Rose Swartwood with them. And I looked at that picture and did a reading.
Right away, Jordan surprises the police.
The perpetrators, I felt, came into the dwelling believing they were going to do a burglary, and they were surprised to find that there was a person in the house. And then I feel as though both the perpetrators felt as though the whole situation went completely wrong, that they had gotten much more involved than they wanted to in the crime itself.
Jordan claims his visions reveal not only what happened during the crime, but also what the killers did after.
Then I felt as though they would try to put things back the way they had found it.
Again, the cops are surprised. Jordan has just identified the reason their investigation has so little physical evidence. But the big question is, can he tell them who killed Rose Swartwood? To find out, they hand him a stack of photos.
I took probably between 50 and 75 mugshots of various people to see if any of them had any significance to him whatsoever.
We had pictures of people who had been suspects but ruled out, and we had pictures of people who we didn't think had any involvement whatsoever. No names on any of the photographs or anything.
Just quietly, we sat there for approximately 10 or 15 minutes as he flipped through several mugshots. And I noticed, as did Sergeant Patterson, he pulled out a picture of Bill Cuddy and set it aside. He then continued to flip through the photographs, and probably 20 or 30 photographs later, he pulled a mugshot of Demetrius Moore, and he laid that down.
I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
It was a moment that would change the course of a 2-year investigation.
When he pulled those two pictures out and set them aside, I was trying my best not to look at Sergeant Patterson, but he had pulled out our 2 prime suspects.
With no prior knowledge, how could the psychic have zeroed in on the 2 prime suspects?
Just about everything that he described was pretty much on the money.
But can a psychic's dark visions help police find justice for Rose Swartwood? For 2 years, Elmyra, New York area detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been hunting the vicious killer of an elderly widow.
Very unusual for us to have a crime like that. It was extremely rare here.
With little evidence and no witnesses, the police investigation had hit a wall. Until a psychic identifies the 2 prime suspects. Suspects who, up to now, detectives haven't had the evidence to arrest.
When he completed going through all the photographs, he put the rest of them down and said that he felt the 2 that he had pulled out, that being the photographs of Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy, were in fact the 2 people that he felt were directly involved in the crime of the death of Rose Swartwood.
William Cuddy is a name very familiar to Elmyra police.
Cuddy was doing time. He pled guilty in June of '89 to the sexual abuse charge that I had originally investigated him on.
William Cuddy was a suspect because a jailhouse informant had contacted Detective Moosey saying Cuddy had been bragging in jail about killing Rose. But when the detective tried to question Cuddy, the prisoner wouldn't talk.
He had an incredible loss of memory. He did not wish to remember any of the details and immediately posed a problem for us.
Demetrius Moore is another story.
Demetrius Moore was actually a neighbor of the victim and was questioned along with several other people as a potential suspect.
Moore has remained a suspect because he had a motive. He blamed Rose and her complaints about his loud music for his eviction from Hawthorne Court.
In fact, a few weeks prior to her death, some obscenities were written on her back door. It was alleged that Demetrius was the one that was responsible for putting those obscenities on the back door.
People in the neighborhood are afraid of Demetrius Moore. Rumors on the street say he is linked to the criminal underworld. His reputation has been a major stumbling block to the investigation.
Demetrius was free and on the street, and which was another thing that hampered some people wanting to cooperate with us.
By pulling the two mugshots, Phil Jordan has confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. Now the psychic has a vision of the actual crime.
Whenever I work a case, I not only try to discover how the person may have died, but I also try to figure out what the injuries were inflicted with. In this case, I felt as though she was stabbed, and I could feel that there'd be a rather long knife that was used.
If one was to read the autopsy report, they'd understand that Mr. Jordan's descriptions were quite correct.
The psychic also claims he can see which of the two suspects actually stabbed Rose.
Phil described to us that the person who did the actual slaying, the actual killing itself, would have a tattoo on their shoulder.
I noticed a marking on his arm that would be a tattoo, and I felt that it had a woman's name in it, but I couldn't make out the woman's name.
I knew that Cuddy had such a tattoo on his left shoulder. Mike was not aware of it. No one else connected with the case was aware of it.
And that he was the perpetrator, the assailant that killed Rose Swartwood.
The tattoo is a stunning revelation, one that Jordan had no way of knowing.
Yeah, he was able to describe Mr. Cuddy as being a vicious person, a person who hated women, had a deep hatred for women.
After 2 frustrating years, Detectives Moosey and Patterson's visit to Phil Jordan re-energizes the case. More than ever, they believe Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are responsible for the death of Rose Swartwood.
We left there with some pretty surprising feelings that he had told us things about Cuddy that probably not a lot of people had known or even investigated.
But now the police must prove that Cuddy and Moore are the killers, and it's not going to be easy.
So we continued to build the case, and we weren't going to jump before we had all the evidence we could collect and all the information that we needed.
A major difficulty has been placing Cuddy and Moore at the crime scene. The detectives revisit the forensic evidence.
There was a sample of blood that was found at the point of entry, which is a rear door, a small broken window.
The drop of blood doesn't match the DNA of either Rose Swartwood or William Cuddy, but trying to match it to Demetrius Moore has stymied the police.
You would have to apply for a court order. And in this case, in order to get a court order, you would at least need enough evidence to substantiate that this person was a viable suspect. Initially, we didn't feel we had enough evidence to do that.
The other piece of forensic evidence comes from the victim's body, bite marks. In the struggle before she died, Rose Swartwood was bitten on the shoulder.
Bite marks are very difficult to identify most of the time, especially when the victim is the receiver of the bite mark.
Though the psychic and the cops both believe William Cuddy stabbed Rose, the investigators don't believe he bit her, and for good reason.
Mr. Cuddy wore dentures, and it was clear that the person who did the biting didn't wear dentures.
If Moore and Cuddy were accomplices in the murder, Moore must be the one who did the biting.
There was actually a photograph taken of Demetrius Moore's teeth on the day of the homicide. When he was being interviewed, the detectives thought enough and were smart enough to take a voluntary picture of his teeth.
Demetrius Moore's teeth may be the key to solving the murder mystery, but he's about to do something no one could ever imagine. For 2 years, detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been investigating the murder of elderly widow Rose Swartwood.
This was an absolute senseless crime from the very beginning.
Psychic Phil Jordan has identified the 2 prime suspects, Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy.
At the time of the incident, I believe that I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
Detectives have only 2 significant pieces of evidence: a single drop of blood and bite marks found on the victim. Police believe the bite marks belong to Demetrius Moore, but before they can prove it, Moore does something very strange.
The unique thing there was it was found that Demetrius had filed his teeth.
Using a chisel, incredibly, Moore files down his own teeth. What's worse for detectives, they're still unable to obtain a warrant to test Moore's DNA or indeed make a mold of his now damaged teeth. Frustrated, the detectives return to Phil Jordan. What they really want to know is what connects their two prime suspects.
There was no information, or anyone had never come forward to put those two together at any given time.
Again, the psychic, who has been told nothing about the case, amazes the detectives. He confirms their belief that Cuddy and Moore were together at a party the night Rose was killed.
I felt as I observed the party, it would be a party I would not want to go to because I know I would feel uncomfortable by the character of people that were there. I could see that it was people having a good time, but yet more for the sake of partying to probably drink and get high.
The party is crucial to the investigation. It's the potential link that puts Cuddy and Moore together the night of the murder.
When we learned about the party initially occurring the night of the homicide, it was very difficult for us to get people at the party to remember who came, who left, who was there, who came with who. So locating people that were at the party for additional information on these two or anyone else that might have been with them was very difficult for a period of time.
I remember very distinctly seeing the house where I felt that the party had taken place, that there would have to be an enclosed stairwell going up the outside of the house.
He felt that the house was, I believe he said, green in color and had a very distinct outside staircase which led to a second floor, which Sergeant Patterson and I knew to be the location of the party house.
I felt as though they would be first at the party, they would leave the party, commit this heinous act, and then go back to the party, which showed me they probably had little conscience.
Is Jordan's paranormal vision correct? Detectives in Elmyra, New York are closer than ever to solving the murder of Rose Swartwood. Armed with a psychic's visions of the crime, they confront reluctant witnesses.
We did have people that came forward, finally, and did remember Cuddy coming with Demetrius Moore. Yes, that link was finally made.
Those witnesses now paint a startling portrait of Moore and Cuddy's behavior the night of the murder.
Demetrius and Cuddy left the party, supposed to go get some beer and money for beer and drugs or whatever. When they returned, Cuddy had a lot of blood on him. Demetrius had a small amount on him, and there was some argument out on the porch, and I believe Demetrius was saying something like, you didn't have to kill her like that.
Once again, Phil Jordan was right. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy were together the night Rose Swartwood was killed. Finally, police have the link that puts their suspects together the night of the crime. They can now get the court order to compare Moore's DNA with that single drop of blood found at the crime scene.
We certainly felt confident that there would be a match, or at least a grouping that was consistent with, which would be sound evidence against him being at the scene of the crime, which he had denied, for years at this point.
Demetrius Moore's DNA matches the blood found on Rose Swartwood's broken window. Moore and Cuddy are charged with the second-degree murder of Rose Swartwood. At the trial, Moore challenges one of the key pieces of evidence against him, that he filed down his teeth.
The most unusual thing I ever saw on a witness stand. His excuse was, when he took the stand, his teeth were chipped up like that because he opened beer bottles with his teeth. And he opened up 2 beer bottles on the stand. His lawyer wanted to show the jury on the stand.
What it didn't do is alter the pattern of his teeth. It certainly altered the ridges of the teeth.
So they couldn't match the bite marks exactly. It didn't do him any good to file his teeth.
Evidence at the trial showed Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy met at the party house. When they ran out of drugs and alcohol, Moore suggested they rob Rose.
Unfortunately, she had returned home that evening and was found in the apartment. She had apparently been getting ready for bed or just going to bed when the entry was made.
The robbers surprised Rose. There was a struggle. Moore bit the elderly, defenseless victim on the shoulder. Then William Cuddy began to stab her, and he stabbed her over 40 times. After killing Rose Swartwood, Cuddy and Moore dragged her body to her bed, and before leaving, they methodically washed the blood from the floor and the walls, missing just a single drop. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are both found guilty, and both men are sentenced to 25 years.
I can't speak for the jury, so I don't know if it had an impact on the jury or on the trial. It had an impact on me that, I mean, that someone could not only brutally murder a 72 or 74-year-old woman this way, but then stay around and clean it up afterwards. I mean, they have to have no remorse, no conscience.
Today, the detectives are still amazed at the accuracy of Phil Jordan's visions. The psychic pulled William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore's photo from a stack of mugshots and identified Cuddy as the killer by a tattoo on his shoulder. Phil described the attack as a robbery gone bad and the party house where Cuddy and Moore hatched their plan.
A good psychic can provide you with leads or something, or an avenue to go on when you don't have any.
He's done some pretty amazing things.
They wanted to resolve the case for the family and for Rose, but they also wanted the community to be safe.
A business trip turns deadly when a state auditor is found at the bottom of a ravine.
Somebody was mad, and they took it out on this victim before they actually executed him.
We all knew that foul play had occurred.
There's a killer on the loose, and police have little to go on.
But we didn't have any blood evidence. We didn't have any fingerprints.
Until a psychic breathes new life into the case.
I'm seeing a murder now. Oh my God, it's so dangerous.
But are her visions enough to catch a killer in a lie?
We knew that we were only going to get one chance to speak with Eugene Moore.
And will a psychic's chilling premonition come true?
You won't take him alive.
Shelby, Montana. Population 3,300. Part of the Montana High Line, stretching 650 miles from North Dakota to the Idaho border. It's a crossroads where Highway 2 and Interstate 13 meet, a transient place. The last stop for truckers and trains heading to Canada. On the morning of November 13th, 1989, 40-year-old state tax auditor Walter Sullivan left his home in Great Falls and made the 45-mile drive to Shelby for a business trip. He never returned.
Walt was one of the field representatives who worked out in the field, working with employers, collecting taxes, making sure that employers were reporting properly.
Sue Moore worked alongside Walter for 13 years. He was a dedicated employee who had worked for the state for more than 18 years. When Walter fails to show up for 2 of his appointments, his co-workers begin to worry.
I called the governor's office. I mean, I will never forget this. Whoever his chief of staff or whoever the person was that I talked to said, he'll show up when he sobers up. And I almost dropped the phone. I said, you got this all wrong.
Their indifference angered Sue. She knew Walt to be a family man. He'd married his high school sweetheart and was the proud father of 2 boys. It would take 24 hours for Shelby police to issue a missing persons report for 40-year-old Walter Sullivan.
We began backtracking every place that Mr. Sullivan had went.
Dave Robbins was the Shelby County investigator on the case. He learns that Walter had 3 appointments the day he went missing and only made it to 1.
We're suspecting that the last person that talked to him was Gene Moore.
Eugene Moore owned and operated a truck stop in Shelby. When police contact him, he says he did meet with Walter and that he left the same day. A week goes by, and Walter's disappearance is big news. The whole town is talking.
We start hearing that he was here, he was there, he's turning up all over town at certain times of the day. And
I knew Walt really, really well, and the idea that he was off gallivanting and sporting about somewhere was just nuts. I mean, just nuts. And of course, a horrible, horrible insult to his family.
We were developing information because we were hoping beyond hope that this man would turn up safe and alive someplace.
November 22nd, 9 days after Walter went missing. His mangled car is spotted 250 feet down in a ravine.
We picked our way down away from it so we wouldn't disturb anything, but as you peered over the top, you could see a body laying down there. So we knew we had a crime scene.
There lay the lifeless body of Walter Sullivan.
The car was pretty banged up because it went off this cliff and rolled down there. So a lot of what we did in video footage was to collect the evidence and document where it was.
It was our worst fear was realized, and we were devastated. All I remember doing is crying and wanting to know that something was being done.
An autopsy would reveal that Walter Sullivan's death was no accident.
The victim had been beaten severely about the head and the face, and that he had been shot at close quarters in the back of the head. Somebody was mad, and they took it out on this victim before they actually executed him.
Who killed Walter Sullivan and why? With no fingerprints and few clues, police revisit the last man who saw him alive. Eugene Moore gives them a more detailed account.
He said around 8 o'clock that Mr. Sullivan left to go to his place to do the audit because that's where he keeps the records. He said that Mr. Sullivan did not follow him directly to his place, arrived a few minutes later, and at that point had another gentleman with him who he described as a Native American with long black hair. He stated that Mr. Sullivan only wanted a couple years state tax returns and some checks from his ledger book, and that's all.
When police do a background check on Moore, they learn he is an ex-Marine and has been trained in combat warfare. They also learn he threatened other auditors in the past.
We all knew that foul play had occurred. I mean, we knew it. Walt had said earlier at a meeting with some of the other field reps that he was going to go to Shelby and see a guy who he was concerned about, who he knew was going to be difficult to work with.
Eugene Moore's business was flagged when the state learned he hadn't filed a tax return in more than 15 years.
We're talking about somebody who truly subscribed to that whole tax protester notion. Walt often had a history of bringing employers like that around so that they would start out being very anti-government. And when Walt got done with them, he made them see why he was doing what he was doing, and which is really what the very best of our field reps were able and still are able to do is promote that.
There was a gentleman that worked at Mr. Moore's truck stop, and this guy had been laid off, and so he went to file for unemployment, and there was no files, there was nothing on him, so Mr. Moore had turned in nothing to the state. That's what precipitated this audit that was coming from Walter Sullivan.
Police obtain a warrant to search Moore's business and home, but find no hard evidence.
I felt I had good evidence in regard, though it was circumstantial. We had no physical evidence to tie our suspect to this crime other than the fact of his story and what he had said to us.
Another snag, Moore's wife, Tammy, provides an alibi for her husband, claiming he was at home that entire evening.
It was during that time that, or after that interview, that we called him back to try to do another one, and we were contacted by a lawyer out of Cutbank who said, I now represent Mr. Gene Moore, and he's not going to talk to you gentlemen again, so leave him alone. And so we backed off for a while.
With nothing else to go on, the case is stalled and sits on the shelf for 6 years. Family and friends of Walter Sullivan couldn't let it go. A state worker murdered on the job, and no one was doing anything about it.
The worst part of the aftermath of Walt's tragedy was knowing that this employer was wandering around literally on the loose, and apparently, as we found out later, had changed businesses, had moved around up there, none of which I knew about. It was infuriating. I was mad to tears.
Finally, Sue's anger turned to action. She writes a letter to the local paper demanding justice for Walter Sullivan. That single letter hit a nerve. News media across the state picked up the story.
The pressure actually came from outside. It came from news media, Great Falls. We were constantly being called, and I think people were upset that a crime like this would happen in this community.
It pressured Montana's Attorney General to assign Joe Uribe, an agent from the Department of Justice, to solve Walter Sullivan's murder once and for all.
We had a meeting between all the officers that were involved in the early investigation and myself.
Joe, right off the bat, he saw the difficulties with the case itself. He knew everything we had. He saw the evidence. He saw the statements. So he knew what we were up against.
After reviewing the case, I felt that there were some things we could do to help get the case going again.
That something different was a psychic.
And I got home, and I turned on the TV. I was pretty tired, but I was amped up after reading the case file. So I turned on the television, and there was a program about psychics on there. After watching her on 3 different cases that she worked on, I felt that maybe she could be some help to us.
A psychic encounter was about to ignite a 6-year cold case, and her visions would stun police.
This was revenge.
In northern Montana, a state auditor is found dead at the bottom of a ravine. He'd been beaten and shot in the head. Police have a suspect, but no hard evidence. The case stalls. 6 years go by, and family and friends demand answers. Who killed Walter Sullivan? Feeling the heat, the state assigns a new investigator to the case. Joe Uribe knows he has to solve this murder no matter what it takes, even if it means traveling more than 2,000 miles to ask a psychic for help.
We decided to fly down to Florida because we had some evidence, and she wanted us to mail the evidence to her, and we didn't want to do that. I was still pretty skeptical. I'd never worked with a psychic before, nor had I ever dreamed of working with a psychic.
I was very skeptical, and honestly, I thought it was just a waste of time.
But after we talked about it a while, we thought, since the case was stalled, what harm could it do?
Noreen Renier is a psychometrist who specializes in missing persons and homicide cases.
Psychometry is touching an object and getting impressions in your head and your mind about the object. And we are energy, and a residue of it is left behind in an object. In very passionate crimes of hate or love, it seems like it leaves more energy than just a missing person walking in the woods and being lost. So homicide is easier for me because the energies are much more powerful. Although violent, they're easier for me to pick up.
Investigators use a video camera to document the session.
Give me the first name of the victim, and then what I'm going to do is just very briefly describe the victim, just enough so you know I'm in tune to it.
In our case, we brought several pieces of clothing, and we even brought the bullet that was in the victim's head.
I remember touching the items, the clothing, and I got a picture of the victim. I can feel facial hair.
She told us that she could see the victim and that he had facial hair. Walter Sullivan had a beard. She told us that he was short, stocky, physique, short-necked. Basically described Walter to the T.
Without a word from the investigators, Noreen has no idea whether she has locked on to their victim, Walter Sullivan.
I'm sure that they thought it was a more scientific process if they didn't react, but somehow I needed that little bit of feedback, but I kept going without any feedback.
We told her nothing about the case, and some of the things she said was just incredible.
I see a blue metal building. I see something like an antenna, like 3 going up, train tracks going close by. There was railroad tracks very close to the blue shed.
Remarkably, Noreen is describing the home of their prime suspect. Eugene Moore.
The physical features that Noreen described, such as a blue metal building. There was a blue metal building on the property. She said there was a railroad track close by. Well, just right across the road from him was a railroad track. And it was strikingly accurate.
At one point, a name just sort of popped in my head, the name Clark. C-L-A-I-R. I just feel that sort of name coming in. Clark. And they sort of looked at each other but said nothing.
Came out kind of spontaneously that she said this word Clark, and incidentally, the body and the car were found on the Clark Ranch about 9 miles southwest of town. We were just amazed. We couldn't believe it. In fact, the hair was standing on the back of my neck a time or two.
And now she gives them a piece of information they didn't know.
The moment she touched the bullet, she had a vision of an attack on Walter Sullivan.
And all of a sudden I was ambushed. Oh, I'm hurting. They're hitting me on the head.
We knew that Walter had been beaten, but we didn't know how many people were involved with it or what the circumstances were.
This was planned. They're torturing him. This was about revenge. And then all of a sudden, I had this excruciating pain in the back of my head.
Something went in her head there, or some pain in her head, and that's exactly where Walter was shot. We had developed information about these two other suspects, but they in fact had been eliminated from being in the area. But Noreen was able to put together for us that they were part of the ambush that occurred out at this blue metal building. But she basically laid out the scenario of what we believe is the actual fact of what happened with Walter Sullivan.
But investigators were about to be amazed even more.
God, it's so dangerous. You won't take him alive. I saw the face in my head, one eye at a time. Each feature, the artist put it together. Eyebrows more close to the eyes. So we had two faces for them. One is a male and one was a female.
She provided information to her artist, which very accurately depicted our main suspect and his wife.
They again looked at each other, thanked me, packed up their stuff, and left. Again, no feedback on how well I did or how badly I did. No grades were given.
What Noreen didn't know was that her visions gave police new reason to go back to their prime suspect, Eugene Moore.
For me, it brought all of the elements together, and I knew at that point that we had the right man. We'd done intensive homework. We went back step by step through his statement, and we reviewed everything he told us, and we went out to look to see if this is true or not true.
Uribe visits Moore at his truck stop and tells him he is with the Attorney General's office. He says he's there to close the Walter Sullivan case once and for all and wants to hear Moore's side of the story.
He opened up just like a flower and said, well, absolutely. I've been waiting to talk to somebody. I have a lot of things that I want to say.
This time, Moore's story is very different from the one he told 6 years ago. He states that Walter did show up at his truck stop and asked for his records. Moore told Sullivan they were in the blue building and that he should get them himself. He then says he never saw Sullivan again.
And here he comes out with an entirely different set of information, a whole different story. And, of course, it was contrary to everything he told us back in 1989.
Back in 1989, Moore claimed that he met Walter at his home and that he noticed a Native American in his car. He personally handed Walter his records and watched them both drive away.
It's typical when a person is lying to you, a year later or 2 years later, whatever, they don't remember their lies. Everybody remembers the truth, but you can't remember when you lie.
Uribe decides to take a chance. After 6 years, police had no new evidence against Moore, but what they did have was a psychic scenario of how Walter Sullivan was killed, and Uribe uses it on Moore. On the morning of November 13th, 1989, Walter Sullivan meets Eugene Moore at his house to discuss his taxes. Sullivan follows Moore towards his blue shed. It's there that he's ambushed by Moore and 2 other men. They stuff Sullivan's body into the trunk of his own car, drive 9 miles, and push it off the side of Clark Road, where it drops 250 feet down into a ravine.
Moore had no idea what we knew, and that worked very well for us because it acted like we had the details of what actually happened on the day of the murder. And the more we got into it, the more broken down he became.
Incredibly, the psychic's version of the crime was true enough to convince Moore to break down and confess.
You could just see an emotional change on his face.
After 6 years, police finally have a confession. But do they have their man?
He went from a very positive, hey, I have something to say here and I want the world to know I didn't do this and here's why. But as we broke him down and as we showed all the discrepancies, you could just see him kind of shirk and shrink in his chair. And then he began to come around to the point where he wanted to, hey, if I confess to this, what's going to happen to me? And then he started trying to make arrangements or cut a deal with us right on the spot to determine how many years in prison he was going to get. He had told us he didn't want to go to prison and that we'd never take him alive.
A psychic's vision is about to go unheeded.
You won't take him alive.
A Montana state auditor is found dead near the small town of Shelby. After 6 years, a co-worker's letter would make state headlines and puts investigator Joe Uribe under the gun to solve the crime. With no new leads, Uribe asks a psychic for help. Her visions of the crime send the police back to their prime suspect. When confronted, he confesses.
His story finally crumbled right before his eyes. He broke down.
At last, police have Eugene Moore exactly where they want him. But instead of taking him into custody, police decide to follow protocol and let him go.
Our Attorney General instructed us not to arrest him because it had been so long since the murder. We wanted to put it into a warrant of arrest with a information that we would file with the judge and let a judge determine, based on the information we had, whether or not there was enough grounds or probable cause to go ahead and make the arrest.
It was a costly mistake, one that the psychic had predicted.
He's so dangerous. You won't take him alive.
He had told us he didn't want to go to prison and that we'd never take him alive. And once he walked out that door, I knew we'd made a big mistake.
When police return the next day with an arrest warrant, Eugene Moore is gone. He's spotted heading towards the Canadian border.
We knew he had a handgun and we knew he had a rifle. And we felt at that point that it was very dangerous. But we had to stop him. We called ahead and radioed ahead and had additional forces come in, and they used stop sticks, which are devices that are used to blow out the tires on a vehicle. And we had them deployed in such a manner that we got his tires flattened. And in the event of that, he even still went 1.5 miles after his tires went down because he didn't want to stop.
Police do all they can to stop Moore, and when they finally do, he tries to shoot himself, fails, and turns his gun on police.
Several shots were exchanged. 2 officers were shot before Mr. Moore was in fact shot and killed.
Noreen's premonition was right. Police would never take Eugene Moore alive.
Officials say it began when they tried to arrest Eugene Moore for a 1989 murder. But minutes later, deputies found themselves on a chase. Moore led them down this road, and that is apparently when the gunfire broke out.
We didn't want him to kill himself or get shot. We wanted him to go to prison. Being these anti-government leanings that he had, didn't feel that he owed the government anything. He's a businessman, and in fact hadn't paid taxes in years.
Eugene Moore's death meant there would be no justice for Walter Sullivan. Any evidence of Moore's accomplices died with him.
All the evidence that we had, nothing could be corroborated. As far as his involvement went, and especially any closure for the victim's family in a court case at all.
We should never have allowed him to get away from us. We should have arrested him on the spot. Looking back on it all, that probably was the biggest mistake in my career.
But there's no mistaking that a psychic's vision helped police to force a killer's hand.
The thing that Noreen Rainier did for us is, you know, police work, we did all the basics. We went back and did all the groundwork. And all the elements were there, but there just wasn't quite enough to make the arrest.
I think I gave them more ammunition and more confidence about what really happened, so when they confronted the murderer, they could bring these things out by my clues, my information, my seeing what happened to Walter and how he was killed.
I, as an investigator, would not discount any information from any source. You get it, you filter it. If it's of use, you use it, you run with it. And that's the way I view the psychic.
I think I'm accurate in all my cases. Never 100%. Nothing is ever 100%, even in this reality. In the psychic world, of course it's not. But I felt very accurate. I felt the pictures were coming. I was seeing clearly. I felt I did my job, and I think I did it well. I don't feel I solve crimes. I think I'm just a small part in helping it come to a successful conclusion.
Sue Moore's efforts to convince the state to reinvestigate would bring Walter's killer down and change the way the state of Montana did business.
Field reps now carry cell phones, are much better about documenting where they are and how long they're going to be. And frankly, if there's any question at all, they subpoena the employer into the sheriff's office. Walt was a tough guy, and he believed he could handle his job. I mean, the reason he asked to be moved out to the field from being a computer guy was he really wanted to work with employers. He had a great talent and skill for it. For me, that was really the great tragedy of Walt's story, was this guy who loved his job, loved what he did, cared so much about providing a good service as a state employee, was not served well, in my opinion, during that time. It was a very awful thing to live through. I cannot imagine what his family went through. As a friend, I know how incredibly painful and tragic it was. To me, there was just a sense that at least it's resolved.
Sue Moore was determined to keep Walter Sullivan's memory alive. She lobbied, and finally in March 2004, 15 years after his death, the state renamed a building in Walter Sullivan's honor.
Walt was, in many ways for me, a mentor. I mean, there's not a time I walk into that building and see that plaque and don't have a memory of Walt in that building. It's great to have that there, but I sure wish we didn't have to have it.
In Malvern, Arkansas, the son of a local police investigator is abducted at knife point.
I thought that somebody that I had either arrested or busted was getting back at me in some way.
But a massive manhunt fails to find him.
The first 24 hours are crucial because the longer it goes, the consequences are always worse.
His parents, desperate to save their son, ask a psychic for help.
She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
Can the psychic help to find Tyson before it's too late?
He was going to kill Tyson.
Malvern, Arkansas, a town of 9,000, is home to the world's largest brick factory. It's also home to 17-year-old Tyson Ephford. A typical teenager in his last year of high school, he's passionate about basketball and his pickup truck. To pay for his first set of wheels, he also works part-time on the night shift at the local food center. His shift on November 14th, 1991 begins like any other. until a man approaches Tyson and says that his beloved pickup has been hit in the parking lot. Telling the manager he'll be right back, Tyson follows the man out to investigate. He never returns. 30 minutes later, when the manager sees that Tyson's truck is still parked in the lot, he calls the police, and the police call Tyson's parents, Anita, a probation officer, and Henry Ephford, a county sheriff.
We get to the parking lot, and his truck and his school books and stuff are still there. I knew something had happened, because he thought more of that truck than he did anything in the world, you know.
The next morning, Malvern wakes up to one of the largest manhunts in Arkansas history.
All law enforcement in Hot Spring County, Malvern, the city, the county, the state, everybody was out looking for him.
Chuck Hefner is the lead investigator for the Arkansas State Police.
When you have a father, no matter where he works, involved, you have to keep some distance. We did not cut him out because it's his family. He wants to be involved, and he's a police officer.
But the investigation has few leads, except for the night manager's sketchy description of the man he saw with Tyson, and another witness who saw a scuffle in the parking lot. The Ephfords' only son has simply vanished.
They were hunting, they were looking, and I couldn't get no feedback. No feedback. None. It's just like somebody had come in and taken him off the earth.
2 days pass, and police fail to uncover a single new clue. His abduction is a complete mystery.
I think even the police even thought that there would be a ransom call in, but there wasn't.
I didn't feel like it would ever be a ransom. I felt like that it was revenge against me. In fact, deep down, I just knew that I would find him dead.
You'll always look for a child that's alive. That's what you're looking for. You hope you don't find the other, but that's not what you're looking for until there is some evidence to point you in that direction. And we didn't have anything to point us in that direction, so we were still looking for Tyson to be alive somewhere.
Just bring my son home, or tell me where I can go get him anywhere, anything that you want.
But with no evidence, the odds of finding Tyson alive are fading by the hour.
At that point, the parent was more than police officer. I would have done anything, to get my son back.
I love him. He is our only son.
Then, out of desperation, Anita Ephford's brother makes a suggestion.
We love him.
And I said, "Who's Carol Payton?" He said, "She's a psychic in Little Rock." He said, "I've used her a couple of times." And I said, "Yes." I said, "You do whatever you need to do. Get her down here."
And I said, "Yes, of course, I'll help. But I need some things from him in order to touch into him, to find out what's happened to him."
Carol Pate learned as a young girl she had a psychic gift for finding missing people. Since then, she's been involved in hundreds of investigations.
I use psychometry. That is touching a photograph of an individual or of a place, or handwriting and ink, touching that. And it's like tuning in a radio station. I see what they see. I feel what they feel. I think what they're thinking primarily.
3 days after Tyson's disappearance, Carol Pate drives from Little Rock to Malvern to meet the Ephfords.
She wanted something of his that was personal, that no one else had worn or touched or really anything. And I said, "Well, I've got a shoe." And she said, "Yes, I can focus in on him. Do you have a recent picture of him?"
So they brought me a photograph, and they brought me his shoe, and I sat down at the table, and I quietly touched into both. And the first thing that I got was he was alive. Tyson's alive. That was wonderful.
But Carol also tells Anita she is visualizing the whole abduction, just as Tyson had experienced it.
I saw the whole thing immediately. I saw the men, I saw the man in camouflage, I saw the truck. It happened very quickly.
Now Carol asks Anita to take her to the crime scene.
I got in touch with Henry, and I told him that I had Carol with me, and we met him at the parking lot.
Henry Ephford's conscience is torn. As a cop, he deals in hard evidence. As a father, he's willing to try anything.
I get Tyson coming out of the front of the store at the parking lot. I got a better visual of the abductors. I got a better visual of the way they went out and how they grabbed him and how they forced him into the truck. There's a man that grabs him, the man that told him that the truck had been hit. He throws him inside the truck.
I call myself a halfway decent investigator. I'm getting information that nobody else had ever got. We didn't even know which direction he had went in, other than he went out the back of the parking lot.
They drive. They went that way, right out through the back, and to the left.
Will the psychic's visions turn out to be true and help Tyson's family find him before it's too late? In Malvern, Arkansas, a massive search has failed to find 17-year-old kidnap victim Tyson Ephford. After 2 frustrating days of no leads, his parents ask psychic Carol Pate to help them find their son. At the crime scene, the parking lot of a local grocery store, Carol has a vision that Tyson is still alive. She claims she can even see where his abductors have taken him.
They went that way, and they turned left.
She said something to me about, I'll see a ridge. And I thought maybe she was talking about a mountain or a ridge or hill or something. And she said, no, it's a road. And I said, there's a ridge road.
Yes, that's it, Ridge Road. They took him down Ridge Road. They don't live far from Ridge Road. They took him to a house.
Tyson's father, a county sheriff, asks Carol to lead him to the location where she believes his son is being held.
And it was like I was following a trail of energy. And I started getting the details on the house. The house was small, white. It didn't look like a house. It looked different.
And she carried me straight down. We hit the end of the blacktop and went into the gravel.
The energy stopped. And I couldn't tell which way to go.
And she told me, she said, I've lost it.
But it was like there was a wall there, and I couldn't go any farther. And we weren't supposed to go any farther.
Despite Carol's frustrating psychic dead end, Henry and Anita are convinced she holds the key to finding their boy.
This was the first information that we had gotten.
Nobody was coming up with anything. And then me talking with Carol, I was feeding that information to them.
So anything that he would give us, we would look into, because he knew the area well.
One promising lead is Carol's description of where Tyson is being held, a simple white house or a hunting trailer, popular in this rural area.
He had told us that she could see him in a building like a deer camp. That focused all of the investigation on buildings and deer camps and stuff. We searched deer camps in Clark County, Hot Spring County, Dallas County. In other words, what she was telling me, the whole investigation was in a roundabout way of swinging to what she had said, because we had no other leads.
But even though Henry is a respected local cop, not everyone involved in the investigation is happy that the Ephfords have asked a psychic for help.
None of the police would work with me any way, shape, or form. I had to work directly with the Ephfords. That was the only way.
And we had some of the officers, one officer, elected officer, that said it was the work of the devil. Well, that's his belief. But I'm an investigator. I take anything that I can get a hold of to try to get to the bottom of the case.
The Ephfords and Carol Pate agree to keep in constant contact. Carol will try to connect psychically with Tyson every day and report what she sees or senses.
I checked on Tyson every single day. I was in contact with the parents every single day. I would give them information that I was seeing, and I knew he wasn't far from where I lost the energy trail.
I wanted to believe that he was still alive and that we would find him. She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
The psychic is sure Tyson is not dead, although some of her visions are deeply disturbing.
He was very frightened. I knew that he was being abused.
She talked about Russian roulette, where they hold a gun to your head and pull the trigger, and that they were doing that to Tyson, but she said he's still alive.
I felt the gun against my head, or Tyson's head. It was a bizarre feeling.
According to Carol's dark, disturbing visions, there are two men who abducted Tyson. One wears cowboy boots and a unique belt buckle, but he disappears from her psychic view. The other man is always there, always has a gun in his hand, and never takes his eyes off Tyson. But there are some visions that Carol does not dare tell the parents.
The man raped Tyson on several occasions. There was a lot of brutality. There was a lot of...
5 days have passed since Tyson disappeared without a trace. Apart from the psychic's visions, there are still no new clues.
I was just wore completely out. I was done to the point that I couldn't think straight. I was to the point that I had to have closure somewhere because I figured Tyson was dead.
He kept saying, you know, you got to, be prepared for this. You got to be prepared. And I said, I'm not going to be prepared for it. He's still alive. And I said, we got to find him.
And then, suddenly, the psychic's visions turned even darker.
There was a total shift, and I knew that Tyson had maybe 24 hours, that this man was going to do something.
I remember her calling and saying that, we've got to find him because...
She said something about a grave.
In Carol's vision, Tyson is dragged from the house, taken to a field, shown 3 graves, and forced to kneel down in one of them. Then the man points a gun at his head.
It was very strong, very powerful, and I was very afraid for him.
That night, Carol holds a psychic vigil. A powerful psychic tool she believes could stop Tyson Ephford from being killed.
I recognize that my psychic abilities are gifts through God, and I ask and I pray for help, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me, ever. Lord God, we ask at this time for the safe return of Tyson Ephford, that there be no harm done to him, no harm to anyone involved. And we ask this now in the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
The same night, around 2 a.m., Malvern police get an unexpected phone call. The Ephfords' prayers are answered.
I said, my name's Tyson Ephford. I've been released.
Against all odds, Tyson Ephford has been let go, released on a lonely stretch of highway just a mile from his house.
And he reached over to me and said, can we be friends? Of course, I shook his hand to get out of the situation I was in. And I ran as fast as I could to the nearest house.
I didn't even stop in the road. I just went straight through the yard and went right up to the porch.
And then when I saw Tyson, I got out of the car. And so he grabbed Tyson, and I grabbed him, and of course I was crying and all upset, and I had my baby back.
Tyson's parents take him directly to the hospital. On the way, he talks about his abduction, a story that is both horrifying and chillingly familiar.
After I get Tyson in the unit, he and Nita was in the back seat. And he went and told me, he said, Daddy, he raped me.
Tyson's story is so horrific. His parents are grateful that he's alive to tell it. But it's also so bizarre, the police are finding it hard to believe. A massive manhunt involving the FBI, state and local police, and hundreds of volunteers can't find 17-year-old Tyson Ephford. But 6 days after his abduction, he's suddenly released in the middle of the night near his house.
This highway right here is Highway 9. This is where I was dropped off when I was released. And I ran to the nearest house down this road right here.
Like the family, the police are relieved and amazed Tyson is still alive. But the story he tells is so horrifying, it's hard for the police to accept.
Myself and an FBI agent interviewed him for about 5 hours. I needed more information to corroborate what he was telling us.
They said, there's no way he could have gone through what he went through and survived.
The police may be skeptical about Tyson's dark tale, but remarkably, it matches exactly with Carol Pate's psychic visions.
There was questions that I did ask him. I said, was there any guns? And he said they stuck it up to my head. They put a bullet in it, and they kept pulling the trigger. I said, Henry, that's what Carol told us about the Russian roulette.
I didn't know how she would know that. Only I would know that because I was the only one going through it.
What Tyson went through, I experienced to a lesser degree, but nevertheless I experienced it physically. I could feel it physically. That's why I would disconnect. It was extremely painful.
And then I asked him, I said, did one of them wear cowboy boots? And he said, yeah, Kevin Scott wore boots. And from the way I understood, she was seeing this through Tyson's eyes.
I saw the men, I saw the man in camouflage, I saw the belt buckle. But Tyson, I think being the son of police officers, took notice of everything around him.
To confirm Tyson's story and bring the kidnappers to justice, the police need to find the men fast. Tyson gives them a lead, a name he saw on a letter in the house where he was held. Within hours, 35-year-old Carl Meany is arrested. The psychic predicted that Carl Meany's house where Tyson was held was close to Ridge Road. In fact, it was a mere 500 yards.
It amazes me how close she was, how close she got to the house where I was.
Carl Meany's address confirms even more of Carol's visions. His house is small, white, and located in the country. And the route that Carol saw the kidnappers take leads right to the door.
There's 2 ways to go. But how did she know which road I was on? Why didn't she go somewhere in the city? It's amazing. This is the crossroads off of Ridge Road, where Carol Pate lost the scent right here. She didn't know which way to go, either right that way or left that way. But they went left. If they would have went right, they would have went right to the house.
Meany's address confirms Carol's psychic vision and how close she was to actually finding Tyson. Was she also right about him being in mortal danger? And how close did she come to saving his life? On the 5th day of his abduction, Tyson remembers Meany tying him up and then leaving to go to town. He returns, edgy and upset, and tells Tyson,
Your pictures everywhere, all over the stores, all over the store I went to. Obviously, there's a lot of people looking for you. And I think it really freaked him out where he's going to have to do something today.
He was going to kill Tyson. That was my feeling.
Later that night, he took me out, and he had a gun, a pistol, on him. Walked across the pasture. I seen 3 holes.
I told the parents about the man taking him out and showing him the 3 graves.
I never prayed much before, and I just prayed to the Lord that he would not kill me.
When I realized that Tyson was going to die that night, I had to do something. I had to.
On the night of the 5th day of Tyson's abduction, Carol Pate holds her psychic prayer vigil.
Do I have your agreement for the safe return of Tyson Ephford?
I agree.
I agree.
I said, please don't do this to me. Please don't kill me. He says, I've got to kill you.
Be released.
I said, I promise I will not tell anybody where I've been. Just please let me go.
In the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
And then I guess something keyed, his conscience keyed into him, said, I'll let you go. We're on the road right in front of Carl Meany's house, where that night before he let me go, he took me across to a pasture out there where 3 holes were dug. I think he had every intentions to kill me, and I think something triggered in him where the Lord spoke to him and told him not to do this.
What did make Carl Meany decide to spare Tyson and let him go? Whatever the truth, the Ephford family believes it was the psychic's prayer circle.
And by Carol having the prayer circle, that's talking to God. I believe that that's what got him back to us safe.
Yes, the good Lord was looking over. Because those people were crazy enough to kill him.
I ask and I pray for help, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me.
Tyson and his parents are amazed at the uncanny accuracy of Carol's psychic visions, but the police remain skeptical of Tyson's story until they get another bizarre surprise. The second kidnapper, Kevin Scott, turns himself in.
And then Scott, whenever he turned state evidence, it backed everything Tyson said.
It was a bizarre setup by Carl Meany to use not only Tyson, but to use his own friend as part of his ploy.
Finally, Tyson's story of his abduction is fully confirmed. It was Scott who grabbed him at knife point in the parking lot while Meany drove. He was taken to a small white house in the country where the men played Russian roulette. Meany had fooled Scott, telling him that Tyson was vandalizing his property and needed a scare. But after Scott left, the real reason Meany had abducted Tyson became clear.
They're all playing tricks on Tyson, and Meany's playing tricks on everybody else. Very, very bizarre man, Carl Meany.
With the testimony of Tyson Ephford and Kevin Scott, Carl Meany receives 3 life sentences for the brutal kidnap and will spend the rest of his days in prison. Today, Tyson still lives in Malvern. He's married and drives a forklift for a living. He will never forget those 6 horrific days here on Ridge Road, nor a psychic's role in helping his family find him.
I don't know much about psychics, but I know that she gave my parents hope that I was still alive.
Tyson's alive. He's alive.
He was our only son, and she was going to do whatever she could to help us and to assure me that he was still alive.
She had been telling us the truth. She is somebody we'll never forget.